This is our second conversation with New York City mayoral candidates, and we're going to switch it up a little bit this morning. I'm going to introduce today's discussion, and then Stephen will handle the Q&A with the candidate. It was really important for us to keep some consistency in bringing you the candidates as they launch their policy ideas and proposals and really are into their platform so that we can have a meaningful conversation with the candidates. So every Friday for the next few months, we're going to provide our members with the opportunity to hear from the candidates directly, to learn about their core values, their policy platforms, and the ideas that keep New York City moving forward. It's important for us, when we think about how we foster to provide these mayoral candidates a platform to speak to the Abney audience and to engage and convene on the key policy areas for the future and the things that we care about. And, as we all know, that this upcoming election will perhaps have the largest impact in reshaping the city's political and social landscape in recent election history here in New York City. But the good news is that we have a number of strong candidates bringing big ideas and deep experiences to the table. And the candidate who emerges victorious will face challenges across nearly every major policy area, and our collective future will depend on their success managing us out of this historic crisis that we are in. So we are proud to offer this forum to hear directly from these candidates. And today, I am excited to welcome Shaun Donovan. Shaun is a lifelong New Yorker who has served the people of our city and this nation throughout his career. And a central theme of his work, whether it be in nonprofit sector or at the very highest levels of government, which we all know, has always been the foundational importance of equitable access to opportunity. And we know this firsthand by his work with Abney's Organizing and Action Committee for the 2020 census, when he joined our committee and jumped right in and offered his resources and connections to ensure that New York City receives its fair share of $1 billion in federal funding and congressional representation. Because we have this close relationship with Shaun, we're not going to let him off easy this morning. We are going to ask the tough questions because it's so important for us to understand where the candidates stand in the future of our city. So there's many things we know about Shaun, right? Shaun is one of the most foremost housing experts and policymakers in this country, with a career that began in a nonprofit Community Preservation Corporation. Here in New York City, he served as the commissioner of HPD under Mayor Bloomberg. Then for President Obama, tapped him to become the 15th HUD secretary in 2009 with the daunting task of addressing the nation's foreclosure crisis. Then he served 8 years in the Obama administration, later becoming the director of OMB, where he managed a $4 trillion budget. Well, today we are here to learn new things about Shaun, right? To get a closer look at Shaun and see who he is, more about the ideas he's put forth during his campaign, and really what his agenda is for a better New York for all. As the mayoral candidate, Shaun has already proposed some really interesting ideas, like the concept of 15-minute neighborhoods for every resident in the city. And these equitable, more inclusive proposals are something we care very deeply about here at Abney. But we'd love to hear more. We know that the only path to a true economic recovery is one that is inclusive and equitable, and we look forward to hearing more about Shaun's vision for the city this morning. But before we start, a little bit of housekeeping. One, we're going to ask everyone to please turn on your cameras. We want to be able to see your wonderful faces as we have this discussion. Two, we're asking everyone to please rename yourself so we know who you are on the screen. And third, please remember that your cameras are on. So please, let's be on our best Zoom behavior. And remember, this is being recorded, so we can see everything in your background. So with that, please join me in welcoming Shaun Donovan. Shaun, over to you.
Melva, thank you so much. I deeply appreciate the kind introduction. And thank you, Abney, for having me here today. More importantly, though, thank you for your remarkable work you've done to lift up our city for decades. It was a deep honor to support your efforts to help New Yorkers fill out the census and to get our city the resources and the respect that it deserves. I want to start with a story, if you'll indulge me. On October 18th, 1977, I went to a ball game at the old Yankee Stadium, sitting in the upper deck. It wasn't just any game, it was the game in which Reggie Jackson hit 3 home runs, leading the Yankees to win the World Series. On the way home, sitting on the subway car with my dad, amidst the cheering and celebration, the car was packed. But in it were also some who would be sleeping on the street on that cold autumn night. Our city, the city my dad had immigrated to in search of opportunity, was in crisis. The Bronx was quite literally burning. At the same time, a man named Lou Rudin was watching that crisis take hold of our city and was spurred to action, motivating and organizing others to help revitalize our struggling city as Abney's first president. We both, Lou as a leader of the city's private sector and me as a young kid, wondered how the wealthiest, greatest city in the world could turn its back on its own and let so many suffer. And we were both impacted to our core in a way that would lead us to public service. Today, over 28,000 New York City lives have been claimed by COVID. Millions are struggling to pay the rent and feed their families. In this moment of crisis, it's hard not to ask ourselves once again why our city is falling short. There is again this feeling for many that our city is slipping away, that the damage is too much to overcome, that New York itself may not be able to recover. But Lou Rudin and those that followed his call to service refused to let New York's dire straits define its future and work to change its path. We must do the same now. In the world's most diverse place, the bold confidence in what our city can be, sometimes in direct defiance of the odds, is perhaps the singular trait that New Yorkers share. Yes, right now the odds feel stacked, and yes, the challenge in front of us feels overwhelming at times. When you find yourself in the midst of a crisis, that's natural. It's the job of leaders in these moments to step in, rally us forward, and support communities as they fight their way to a stronger future. Right after school, I worked at the Community Preservation Corporation, where I helped rebuild the very same neighborhoods in the Bronx that I watched burn down as a kid. I met New Yorkers that were doing whatever they could with whatever they had to lift up their communities, planting seeds in the cracks of the concrete that would sprout a remarkable affordable housing development in Melrose called Villa Verde, a place so beautiful it would make Ruben Diaz Jr. later say, "Where the Bronx once burned, we are building gardens in the sky." What I didn't know then was that I would be thrust into crisis leadership. But that is where I found myself time and again, nonetheless. It's in these moments, at these times, when you look in the eyes of those who are suffering. And right then, you've got 2 choices. You can step aside, telling yourself that someone else will take care of it. Or you can step in, look the problem in the face, lead, and overcome it. I had the honor of serving as Mayor Bloomberg's housing commissioner, stepping in and leading in the wake of 9/11, as our entire city refused to be knocked down, loudly demonstrating to the world the strength and determination of New Yorkers. And I brought that experience forward when President Obama asked me to be his housing secretary during the worst housing crisis of our lifetimes. I stepped in, I led, and I worked tirelessly to help people get and stay housed. When President Obama asked me to help bring our great city back, I stepped in and I led the federal government's Hurricane Sandy rebuilding task force. I gave our neighborhoods the tools to come back stronger and better prepared for the next challenge. And again, I carried those lessons and skills to step in and take a leading role in the White House's Ebola and Zika outbreak strategy, preventing devastating pandemics in the early stages. Through these crises, I've learned directly, viscerally, what to do in a situation like the one we're facing today. Sitting next to Dr. Fauci, a proud New Yorker, if ever there was one, in the Situation Room, it was always clear that a health crisis is not about ego or ideology. It's about service and competence. That's why we put Dr. Fauci and our health professionals front and center as the faces of our responses to Ebola and Zika. That's why we brought the United States military in right away to tackle the challenge. That's why we were successful at managing those outbreaks and staving off pandemics. And that's why our response to COVID has failed. In the midst of this crisis, in both the briefing room at the White House and the Blue Room at City Hall, we had the wrong messengers playing the wrong roles. Leadership means being willing to set your ego and ideology aside for the people you serve and to let the professionals do their jobs. Donald Trump failed to do that. Bill de Blasio failed to do that. Removing contact tracing and testing from the health department was both a failure and a warning sign that mirrored what we saw countless times in Washington the last 4 years. The worst thing a leader can do is surround themselves with people who won't tell them the truth. And it showed that telling this mayor the truth would mean losing your ability to do your job. These warning signs pointed us to an outcome that was at once inevitable and avoidable: inequitable, inefficient vaccine distribution in this city. But even with these failures, I'm confident we can turn the page. With new leadership in Washington and new leadership coming to City Hall, we have a chance for change, a chance to turn things around for our health and our economy. My vision for this city is focused not just on repairing its torn fabric and bringing together all New Yorkers to rebuild from the damage done by COVID, but on reimagining New York as an innovative city that truly works for everyone. And to make this happen, I've launched the Campaign of Ideas, putting out the boldest, most comprehensive plans to address our city's most pressing issues. It starts with a simple but profound idea of making every neighborhood in our city a 15-minute neighborhood, meaning every New Yorker will have access to a great public school, fresh food, rapid transportation, a beautiful park, and a chance to get ahead within 15 minutes of their front door. Leading planners across the globe are innovating in ways that enable this kind of equity. To turn an old phrase on its head, if they can make it anywhere, we can make it here, only better. I've committed to closing the persistent and devastating wealth gap in our city, an injustice that not only robs whole communities of fair opportunity, but stifles our entire city's economic potential. A key tool in this fight will be my equity bonds, where every child in New York City will receive $1,000 deposited into a city-administered savings account, with up to an additional $2,000 deposited for each year until they turn 18. What this means is that a child born into poverty under this program will have roughly $50,000 waiting for them when they graduate high school. We know that this money can change the economic trajectory of an entire family over generations. A college education, home ownership, opening a business, erasing debt. And that can transform our children's lives and turbocharge the economic trajectory of our city. I've committed to reimagining the right to shelter in our city as a right to housing, and finally bringing an all-hands-on-deck approach to affordable housing. We will invest in revitalizing and expanding affordable and sustainable housing in our city and support those who've fallen on hard times, whether it's through finding a new home or staying in the one they're in. I've committed to keeping our city safe by using our resources more effectively, by reallocating resources for situations like mental health crises and school safety toward trained professionals that are better equipped to provide the help people need. We can ensure that police officers have the necessary tools to effectively tackle violent crime and close the out-of-state gun pipeline. I've committed to aggressively revitalizing our city's economy, creating 500,000 jobs for New Yorkers by the end of my first term, and launching the most comprehensive training program in the nation so all New Yorkers can build skills towards secure, family-sustaining jobs. But no idea, no matter how grand or well thought out, will matter if we can't keep New Yorkers healthy. Our city was the hardest hit by COVID anywhere in the world. Our city lost the most residents of any city anywhere in the world. Our city faces the most challenging recovery anywhere in the world. And so it's with a native New Yorker's bold confidence in his city that I say, under my administration, New York will become the healthiest city in the world. New York City's made great strides in the last few decades, and here's a place where we owe Mayor Bloomberg and his health policies a great debt of gratitude, with life expectancy increasing by over 3 years from 2001 to 2013, almost 2.5 years longer than the national average. And yet, despite that laudable progress, significant disparities in health and life expectancy persist between white New Yorkers and New Yorkers of color. We have much more work to do. Our city's shortcomings during the pandemic, whether in implementing testing and tracing, or more recently distributing vaccines, have further highlighted the need to address these centuries-old inequities. That's why today, I'm rolling out a comprehensive health plan that will make New York the healthiest city in the world, grounded on the commitment to deal with this pandemic quickly and equitably, eradicate health disparities, and make high-quality healthcare accessible and affordable for everyone. Our first priority will be swift, aggressive, targeted COVID response, focused on helping our hardest hit communities. We will unite the city's disparate and disjointed actions under one unified effort by moving all emergency response and preparedness measures back under the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. We will repurpose contact tracing funding and transition toward more robust vaccine distribution, and finally ensure that shots are reaching our most vulnerable communities. We will partner with primary care physicians and organizations to not only improve management of the current crisis and distribution of vaccines, but bolster our long-term emergency preparedness at the community level. Looking to the future, we'll build and train a reserve of medical and professional health medical and public health professionals to be mobilized during pandemics so we can act on a plan as soon as a threat appears and keep the situation from getting as awful as it did last year. And we will work with colleagues in the Biden administration and the state government, colleagues with whom I've collaborated so many times over the years to fight crisis after crisis, to ensure that our city gets the funding, the equipment, and the support that it needs when it needs them. I know our city will get out of this crisis, and New York will be better prepared for the next one. But our work won't be done once COVID is under control and our lives ostensibly return to what they were before it began. There was monumental work to be done before, and we must engage that work now by properly investing in the accessibility and affordability of healthcare in our city, closing gaps in health equity, and making our city the global leader in health and life sciences innovation. Disparities in neighborhoods cause the disparities in health that predominantly and immorally impact low-income people of color. Unequal distribution of health services, inequitable levels of air pollution, and a scarcity of fresh food and open space are core drivers of negative health outcomes, and they must be fixed. Building on my 15-minute neighborhood model to address inequities in fresh food, environmental conditions, and public space will ensure that no matter where you are in this city, you can see a good doctor of your choice for primary care within 15 minutes of your home. With that in mind, New York City will create its own public option by effectively resourcing and managing health and hospitals, our federally qualified health centers, voluntary hospitals, and private providers. We'll prioritize giving people access to high-quality primary care, regardless of immigration status. All Americans deserve a true public option that makes healthcare affordable for all, and I'll support the Biden administration in any way I can to make that goal a reality. But we also won't stand idly by while 600,000 New York City adults go without access to health insurance or proper care. We cannot address health disparities. We cannot maximize the potential of our economy, and we cannot make this the healthiest city in the world without ensuring primary care for everyone, including those in our criminal justice system and those experiencing homelessness. This approach will have the added benefit of reducing emergency room visits and hospital admissions while encouraging the more than 250,000 Medicaid eligible New Yorkers to enroll. It will also allow us to more proactively and consistently address longstanding health crises that have only been exacerbated by the pandemic. Issues like mental health, opioid abuse, chronic disease, and unacceptable rates of maternal mortality among women of color. By making our city healthier, we will revitalize entire sectors of our city's economy. Before the shutdown, the hospitality industry in our city provided as many as 400,000 jobs. We must get them back. Hospitality, tourism, and dining help power our city's economy, and they must be central to powering our city's recovery. When we are safe and ready, we will partner with NYC and Company to launch a campaign publicizing ourselves as the healthiest city in the world. And looking toward the future, investments in life sciences innovation will not only make our city healthier, they will strengthen our economy and make our city a global force in improving the health and well-being of all people. To that end, we'll work with residents in the Bronx and Harlem on a comprehensive and collaborative plan to establish dual uptown life sciences hubs anchored in robust job training and clear pathways to employment for residents. We'll also build a freestanding, fully endowed research center for life scientists in Upper Manhattan and build a grad school to enterprise training pathway for PhD students in the life sciences. And we will capture a growing wave of investment and job creation by improving and building upon collaborative efforts with life science industry leaders, major universities, and New York State. From housing to hurricanes, I've been front and center in helping New Yorkers recover from disasters. I'm running for mayor of New York City, not only to pull us out of this crisis, but because we need to reimagine a city that truly works for everyone. I'm running for mayor because in this time of uncertainty and struggle, I'm the only candidate with the right combination of experience during crisis, bold, comprehensive ideas, and the understanding needed to make those ideas real for New Yorkers. And I'm running for mayor of New York City to usher in a new era of compassion and competence, which will move us away from the failed leadership that has made the crisis we're living through even worse. It's been a long journey from that subway car in 1977 to the Oval Office and Situation Room to here today running for mayor of the city that we love. The crises this city has faced formed my core values, they forged my career in public service, and they built the foundation of my experience. Of all the lessons I learned working with Presidents Obama and Biden, the single most important was this: we won't get there alone. There is a new healthy day in the wake of this pandemic, and there is a robust, inclusive economy that closes the wealth gap. There is an equitable recovery, and there is a stronger city where everyone has access to all that makes New York great. There is a place Abney has led us before in the wake of crisis, and there is a place Abney will help us go in the future. I'm running for mayor because I have the experience and vision to lead a new path forward, but I won't get us there alone. It will take all of us. My friends, my fellow New Yorkers, wherever you are across this wonderful, imperfect, irreplaceable place we call home, we have the map and we have the directions to a city that works for everyone. Let's go there together. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Shaun. Thanks for that. Let me start by saying people can put questions in the chat too that we can ask Shaun, so please feel free to do that. I guess I want to start with a question. You talk about us being the healthiest city. We have real budget challenges ahead, real revenue challenges. I guess, will we have the money, or where would we give really primary care to everybody at such a challenging time where there are so many needs?
So, Stephen, let me just say, words are cheap, right? Talk is cheap. The question is, who's the candidate in this race who you actually believe could get this budget challenge under control and invest in the kinds of things that I'm talking about? People forget that President Obama faced the biggest budget deficit since World War II, And we actually brought that deficit down faster than any time since World War II while getting the Affordable Health Care Act done, while getting big investments in infrastructure and housing. And so I fundamentally believe that if we manage our city more effectively, if we invest in the right things and stop paying for things that aren't working, we actually can afford to do these things. So let me be very specific about how to do that. First, we need the help we deserve from Washington. We send $23 billion more to DC every year than we get back in services. We need a mayor who actually knows how to stop that and to get the help that we deserve. And again, let me be very specific. This isn't about having people's phone numbers on my Rolodex. Literally in December, as we were negotiating the COVID relief package, I was on the phone with 3 out of the 8 senators who are part of the Gang of 8 on both sides of the aisle, helping them understand how we could invest in housing, in transit, in state and local aid that would help New York City recover. And I've been on the phone within the last few weeks with the incoming Homeland Security Secretary, who's a good friend of mine, asking and showing him ways that we could actually take FEMA money, invest hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars into our restaurants to cook emergency meals. Those are the kind of innovative ways that we could actually dramatically increase the help we get from Washington. So that's one, we need the help we deserve. Second, we have huge opportunity to manage the city budget more effectively. Every year when I was housing commissioner, we used to get a demand. I know Andy Ryan's on here. I'm going to try not to get too OMB-ish to speak OMB, but we used to get a PEG every year, a program to eliminate the gap, right? We haven't done that in this city in 8 years until COVID hit. We've grown our city workforce by 30,000 people while the city was already shrinking. We know that with a real hiring freeze and aggressively managing attrition, by bringing healthcare costs down with delivery system reform and many other things. And Stephen, let's not forget, we could actually save lives and save money in homelessness, in our criminal justice system, and get better results, more progressive, more equitable results in the city. Think about this. Do you know how much we spend per prisoner per year in our correction system? Over $400,000 per prisoner per year at Rikers. I worked with President Obama to try to close the most expensive prison in the world, Guantanamo. Rikers is the second most expensive, and we get bad results. Those are the kinds of things. On homelessness, when I led the strategy for President Obama, we showed that we could house people and reduce costs. And it goes exactly what I was just saying about health. The problem now, if you live in a shelter, if you live, and we spend $3 billion a year on shelters and hotels, where do you get your health care? In the emergency room. And it's far more expensive. And so we can do this and save money if we stop paying for things that aren't working and start investing in things that are.
In that spirit of spending money smartly, we spend a lot on education, over $34 billion, and per capita we're at the top of the list. And yet we, as a city, I think rightfully feel we don't do right enough by our children, right? Whether it's the over 100,000 kids who are actually homeless, who are in our public school system with dire needs, and that was before the pandemic, to just giving them the education they need. So money has not solved our problem there to date. How can you go deeper for us on how you make progress there?
Yeah, so I think one of the fundamental problems, and I think that this has always been important. It's especially important when we have depression level unemployment still in many neighborhoods around this city. We've got to do a much better job of connecting our education system to jobs. And that means starting at a very young age. And it means making sure we not only provide at least one paid internship to every high schooler in our public schools. That's a commitment I've made in my training and apprenticeship programs. We've got to do a much better job of connecting our high schools to CUNY. CUNY is one of the jewels of public education in this country, but we have not used it effectively to create these pathways into jobs. And then the third thing I would say is making sure that transition, whether it's from a 2-year community college or a 4-year into the workforce, we need to make sure, and look, ABNY is the best example of this. We need to build the public-private partnerships that are going to actually create pathways to jobs. So what would I do? I committed in my first 100 days in office, I would pull together the CEOs of the 100 biggest employers in New York City, and we'd create equity corporate commitments to hire those folks. I'd invest in a New York City Job Corps that was doing the training, and work with unions, work with our whole civic infrastructure that ABNY represents to make sure that we're building those pathways. And let me say one more thing about this, Stephen. I've committed to be the mayor for all New Yorkers. I think a fundamental problem of the last 8 years is that we've demonized and divided New Yorkers. We've said that the private sector is the problem, not part of the solution. And the way we're going to change those politics is by making sure that every kid growing up in New York City, particularly kids growing up in low-income families and Black and brown communities, can see themselves in the jobs of the future, can see themselves working for Amazon, can see themselves working at Industry City, can see themselves working in a job that sustains their family, that can be a clear pathway, apprenticeships and unions and others. When we create that pathway, our politics will start to change as well, because we can all believe that job growth lifts everyone in this city.
Thank you. You know, look, we're big believers in partnerships, and obviously governing is tale of two cities instead of governing as let's live in one city where those who have the greatest ability to help those who have the most need, we believe is the right way. I think we've had years of sort of suspicion of the business community, and so it's refreshing to me. I wanted to kind of change that approach because we are in this together. In the spirit of being in this together, I want to talk about public safety and criminal justice reform. I guess the first big question is, how do you do both things well? How do you give justice and fairness to communities, especially communities of color, and how do you create a public safety system, a police force, and the things around it that also take into account, like, those are hard jobs. Like, being a cop is a hard job, and how can one strike that appropriate? I don't know if it balance is the right word, but how do you do both of those well so it benefits really everybody and gives us a safe city? And we're going to see where crime is going up.
Yeah. So, Stephen, my criminal justice plan, which is the most comprehensive, far-reaching of any of the candidates, really lays this out in 3 ways. We do have to reimagine the way we train and implement policing. We also need to reduce the role of the police and focus them on guns and violent crime, the things that communities are most concerned about. And we have to reinvest in community-based efforts that actually break the cycle of incarceration. And New York actually has made some real progress there, but there's much more that we can do. But I want to say, again, I'm not just talking the talk on this, Stephen. I think what's unique about me in this race, I'm the only candidate that's actually worked with mayors across this country, across the globe, to actually implement these things. I was part of President Obama's 21st Century Policing Task Force. I worked with amazing leaders like Chuck Ramsey, African-American police chief in Philly, who made exactly these reforms. I worked with Mitch Landrieu, mayor in New Orleans, who's a good friend, who was under a Justice Department court order because of the huge challenges in policing there. And we actually made change there as well. And so here's the thing. First, we do need more accountability and transparency. We need to weed out the bad apples. But we also have to stop putting police in situations that put them in conflict with communities and instead put them in partnership. What I hear over and over again, particularly in Black and brown communities in New York, is I want to be respected and I want to be safe. What I'm concerned about is guns, violent crime. And if we can stop asking the police to respond to every mental health crisis on our streets. Think about this. I've worked my whole career in homelessness. There are models around the country where we've created completely revamped 911 systems, where we reduce by over 90% the number of calls that police have to respond to with trained mental health professionals and others. The vast, vast majority are not violent, Stephen. And then we can focus the police on the things that communities really are concerned about. The last thing I would say is, we talk a lot about policing, But the truth is, this is a criminal justice question, not just a policing question. I said earlier, we spend over $400,000 per prisoner per year in our correction system and get bad results. We need to close Rikers and invest in the kind of things that will end the cycle of incarceration. Let me just finish with one last thing. Again, this is not just rhetoric to me, it's about results. When I was housing commissioner, I took some of my housing vouchers and I got a lot of, I would say raked over the coals for it by some people who said, why are you giving housing vouchers to folks coming out of Rikers? The results were remarkable. A year later, 95% of those folks were stably housed, getting back to work, and hadn't reoffended, right? And that was just housing. Imagine if we took some of that $400,000 per prisoner per year and invested it in the things that, like job training and others, that would really help people get their lives back on track. We could actually dramatically reduce incarceration, reduce crime, and help revitalize our communities in ways that I've actually been part of in other cities around this country.
So you talk about working with mayors in other cities. Obviously, you spent 8 years in the Obama administration. We, of course, are more LaGuardia, JFK than Dulles, so to speak. Like we are, we're Abney. We try not to leave the city much, and when we do, we try not to leave the state. So can you just bring me home a little bit? Can you sort of talk to me about like why you, as a New Yorker, are the right person for this, and tell us a bit more about you as a New Yorker?
Yeah, I'm not going to tell you again about the Reggie Jackson 3 homer game.
I was there.
That's a pretty good New York credential, right? But look, here's the thing. My grandfather was one of 10 poor Irish kids who grew up on the south side of London. He worked the docks. As a teenager, he got on a boat alone to go to West Africa, to South America. My dad grew up in Costa Rica and Lima, Peru. He came to this country, got an education, came to this city. He had enough money to buy stationery, started a company, ran it his entire life because it was the city of the future. That's why he came here. And I will say, Stephen, and I will try not to get choked up telling you, my dad had a green card for over 50 years. And when I went into President Obama's cabinet, he said to me, Shaun, I'm ready. I want to become a citizen. I have one condition. Either you or President Obama swears me in. I said, Dad, that would be illegal because I'm not. But 5 summers ago, I got to be the keynote speaker at my dad's induction ceremony in the Great Hall on Ellis Island. That's why I love New York. But here's why I love New York too, is everybody should have that opportunity. And that's not what I saw as a kid. I talked about it in my speech. I saw the South Bronx burn. I saw homelessness exploding on our streets. And I didn't leave. I came back and did something about it. And so while people know I worked in the cabinet, what they may not know is I came back and worked at a nonprofit right after I finished school. I met leaders like Bishop Johnny Ray Youngblood, who led East Brooklyn congregations. They built 5,000 homes, which I helped finance, for folks, 90% of them moving directly out of public housing and buying their first home. They built wealth. I have deep, deep relationships in communities working to make this city great and make it a city that is the city of future for everyone. That's who I am, and that's who I've been for 30 years, working across this city to rebuild from crisis after crisis. And that's why I think I have not only the national experience, but the local experience, the local relationships, the heart and the commitment to this city that make me the right mayor for this moment of crisis.
I guess I'll ask you a very practical political question. Do you have a path? Like, can you win? You are up against people who have either citywide or borough-wide office who have much greater local recognition than you do.
Yes, Stephen, not only do I have a path, I wouldn't trade my path for anybody in this race. And look, you know this, every election begins with, are you the right candidate at the right moment? And let's be clear, New Yorkers want change. They wanted change before COVID hit. They really want change now. And what does change mean? They want a mayor who doesn't put politics first, right? You mentioned Fiorello LaGuardia, my favorite mayor of all time. He used to say there's no Republican or Democratic way to take out the trash. But for 8 years, we've had ideology before results again and again and again. So they want change from that. That's who I am. I've been a public servant for 30 years doing exactly that. But what's interesting is that usually the change candidate has the least experience, right? Look at Andrew Yang, look at Ray McGuire. They've never worked in government. New Yorkers want experience. 72% of them in public polls said that government experience is very or extremely important to them. So I'm the only candidate in this race who combines real change of direction that's not part of the status quo with the deepest, broadest experience in government, especially in crisis. So that's, how do I know? Because when you ask New Yorkers, my profile, when they get to know me, I have the highest favorability and people say they will vote for me. My issue is we've got to get to voters, right? My name recognition has been going up and I've been rising in the polls. I'm just a few points behind Stringer and Adams, tied with Maya Wiley. So I'm in the top tier of candidates, but they do need to get to know me. That's why we've moved aggressively. I put the first ad of anyone in the race up on TV last week. We're going to be aggressive because we know that if people get to know me, I can win this race and I will win this race. The reason we could go up with that ad is because we've actually outraised everybody else in this race this year by far who's participating in the matching system. Ray's gotten a lot of attention because he's not going to get matching dollars. I've far outraised every other candidate this year. That's also allowed me to bring on the best team. I have deep, deep experience in my team in New York, but here's what else. I just hired to be my campaign manager, the guy who won Iowa for Mayor Pete and Pennsylvania for Joe, right? He and the other folks we're bringing in from the Biden campaign really know how to campaign in a pandemic. And so we have the best strategy and the best team to get there. The last thing I will say, Stephen, is ranked choice. Many New Yorkers don't even know that they can choose up to 5 folks for mayor this year. And I'm trying to change that. And I hope Abney will work to make sure voters are educated. But here's the thing about ranked choice. It does 3 things. It increases turnout. It makes for more positive, optimistic elections because when you go negative, it actually hurts you in ranked choice. And you have to run citywide. You have to be able to appeal very broadly across the city. All 3 of those things really help a candidate like me who can have broad appeal, who can appeal to progressives and moderates, appeal in the South Bronx, where I started my career, in central Brooklyn, but also in Staten Island and other places. So I really feel like, as I said, I wouldn't trade my place in this race with anybody. I think we have the clearest path to win if we can keep building the name recognition across the city.
Thank you. And I wouldn't do right if, in talking about ranked choice voting, I wouldn't thank somebody who is on this Zoom, which is Carl Weisbrod, who really did incredible work for lots of ways for our city, but also on ranked choice. So thank you.
I think we could thank Carl on just about every subject we've talked about today. So. Thank you, Carl.
Let's move on to jobs. You talked a bit about jobs. So we scared off one of the few companies that are growing gangbusters, Amazon, in the last, however long time it seems, let's say the last 2 years. And there's a real sense of, even as people go through like a community process, you can't get development done, and it's hard to bring corporations. Obviously, industry city is a big issue in this time for a lot of our members. How do you make this work? How do you have an Amazon grow here? How do you have development here in a way that can actually get through and is fair and benefits everybody?
Right. Well, the first thing, Stephen, is you need a mayor who's not actually going to sit on the sidelines and say, oh, this is a private application, or you need a mayor who's actually leading, because these are jobs for New Yorkers. And anytime tens of thousands of jobs are at stake, you need to jump in and build a coalition that can get it done. But here's the thing, Stephen, and this isn't just about economic development. We've also seen this on housing. Carl has seen this. Anyone who's worked in the city knows that the challenge we have is a growing coalition that is anti-development and anti-growth. And look, we have seen gentrification in our city. We are seeing people of color in particular pushed out, and we need to fix that. We need to do something about it. But the status quo isn't going to fix that. We can't fix that by just knowing what we're against. We actually have to build a coalition that's for something. I call it a progressive coalition for equitable growth. What does that mean? That means having a mayor who actually knows how to build alliances with progressive organizations, with unions, with community groups, with neighborhood leaders, and goes in and doesn't say, here's our plan for your community, but says, here's the resources and the planning of the city. What do you want? What do you envision for a community? That's what I've done over and over again. I talked about Via Verde in my opening remarks. I ran a process that brought the community together to imagine what affordable housing could look like. After Sandy, I did the same thing with Rebuild by Design. And let me just be a little tongue-in-cheek, recall a moment from when I was housing commissioner. We reached a landmark agreement with Acorn, Bertha Lewis, with labor unions, and developers to build Atlantic Yards, not just the Barclays Center, but thousands and thousands of units of affordable housing, right? That was a progressive coalition for equitable growth. And at the announcement, Bertha Lewis kissed Mike Bloomberg on the lips. I don't know if you remember that moment, but it's the first time I've ever seen Mike Bloomberg speechless in my life. Those are the kinds of coalitions that I can build, right? You heard Donovan Richards, you heard Richie Torres, you heard many leaders and community leaders of color say, we should have had an opportunity to do this. In Amazon, Bishop Taylor and leaders in public housing in Long Island City were eager to bring Amazon. Gail Mello at LaGuardia Community College was eager. If we'd had a mayor that could actually take that energy and build this progressive coalition for equitable growth, we could actually get big things done again in this city, but do them in a way that is equitable. That's what I've done my entire career. And I would say, I don't think there's anybody else in this race who showed that they can do that. I have deep credentials and respect for progressives. Why? Because I've ended homelessness, I've entered homelessness in more than 80 cities and states across the country. I was the leader on racial equity in the Obama administration. Donald Trump, when he still had a Twitter account, was attacking me for trying to destroy the suburbs because I wanted to make sure Black and brown people could live wherever they choose, right? I was the first cabinet secretary in history to endorse marriage equality. On climate change, on all these issues, I've been a leader, but I also can bring the private sector, the public sector, nonprofits together to build this coalition in a way that I don't think any other candidate can. And I think it's both one of the things that will help me win, but also as mayor, to build a coalition that can actually get equitable growth done.
Now, a key piece of any coalition for New York City is Albany. And Albany, from a cooperative effort, has been a hard nut for us to crack lately. What's a different approach that works?
Yeah, well, I'm sorry to sound like a broken record, but this isn't theory to me. I've actually walked the walk on this. My first job in government was for Andrew Cuomo. When Sandy hit, funny story, I was at City Hall. President Obama called me and asked me to lead the Sandy Recovery Task Force. And I said, let me just get this straight. You want me to work with Andrew, Mike, Bill de Blasio, who's coming in as mayor, and Chris Christie? You want me to get them all to work together? And he said, you'll be okay, Shaun. You speak New York. So that's what we did. We were actually able to partner very effectively with Andrew and the state level to get big things done. And other examples, when I was housing commissioner, we got a landmark agreement to invest. It was called New York 3, invest between the state and the city in supportive housing and services. 421A, we needed reform. I was able to go to Albany, not just work with the governor, but actually work very effectively with the state legislature to get reforms to 421A that would keep it in place, but actually in affordable housing that we would get. So I've been able to do that again and again. And look, Stephen, I said it in my speech. This is about not putting people before your own ego, right? is being willing to share credit and to make sure that you're willing to follow as well as lead when that's what's required. And that's what I've done over and over again in my career. Is I've been able to get big things done because it wasn't about me and putting myself front and center. It was really about the results.
I just want to ask a question about NYCHA. Obviously, the job's highly relevant to that. NYCHA has been honestly a tragic problem for us lately with lead. And how do you fix it? And how do you fix it in the spirit of the CBC and Andrew? How do you fix it without, again, not a lot of money? But what would you, can you drive to on a specific or two what you would do there?
Well, Stephen, I'll be direct. There are things where we can save money and fix it without money in this city. More money, NYCHA is not one of them. We do need more money. There's a $40 billion capital gap. And what we need to do is accelerate the money to invest there and to bring as many dollars from the federal government as possible. As HUD Secretary, I actually created a pathway to do that, to access Section 8, what is called Section 8 money. I worked with mayors across the country, and we got huge improvement in public housing. San Francisco is a good example. San Francisco was actually worse than in terms of public housing. And we were able to make dramatic progress because they used these tools that I created. Bill de Blasio was very slow to use these tools. He's only just started. He now has a preservation trust proposal, which I think is a good direction that needs state approval. But fundamentally, what we need is to unlock Section 8, which could bring billions and billions of dollars of private capital into public housing to help renovate it. So that's one thing. And look, I've been at the forefront of trying to make that happen. A year and a half ago, I partnered with Darren Walker at Ford, and we brought together the most innovative thinkers about public housing together with NYCHA residents and started to actually look at those plans. And I think that helped create some of the momentum toward the Preservation Trust and some of the progress that we've seen over the last year. But at the end of the day, it's not just about money. You're right about that. And fundamentally, think about this. Your shower is leaking in public housing. By the time the 15 people that need to sign off on repairing it, all the way to 250 Broadway, actually sign off, that leak in your shower has become mold that is causing asthma for your kids. It's caused a leak downstairs that now has collapsed the ceiling and needs to be repaired, right? That's the fundamental problem in terms of the management. And so what we need to do is devolve management to what's called site-based management, give real accountability and authority to people that can make decisions, bring new technology. So when you have a problem like that, you can take a picture on your phone, send it in, track your what's called a work ticket in real time. All of those are things that we can do and have been done in other places, but we need the right leadership. And so that's why I've said I would be the first mayor to put public housing at the center of my housing plan. I'd commit real city capital to it, but real focus around it as well. All of that means we need to finally give public housing the place in our city that it deserves. Think about this. This is the most precious affordable housing resource we have. More people live in public housing in New York than live in Atlanta, Georgia. And it is permanently, preciously affordable housing, but we have not treated it that way and put it at the center of our plans. I'm the only candidate who's really put out a very specific plan of how we do that.
In terms of, and one of the risks obviously to NYCHA as well as the rest of our city is climate change and climate disaster. And obviously Texas is a great example. Would you have gone to Cancun with your cruise?
I've never been to Cancun and I wouldn't have gone. I didn't go during Sandy. I wouldn't go in a disaster here, just for the record.
Most amazing story ever. Anyway, but seriously, do you see those vulnerabilities for us? And if so, what's at the top of the priority? Because that I assume is also spending money to make us safer. But one, obviously, to deal with climate change over time, to make us safe in this moment.
So Stephen, this is the long-term existential threat to this city. And it's why 3 days after launching my campaign, the very first plan I put out was my climate plan. It is the most far-reaching. I'm not going to give you all 8,000 words of it today, luckily for you, but it is a critically important part of not only how we protect New Yorkers, but actually how we make New York City a leader economically as well. And here's why. New York is, and we were under Mike Bloomberg, we could be again the leading city in the world on climate change, right? What could that mean? That would mean that we're actually attracting the most innovative technology to the city. We could be a leader not only in life sciences, as I talked about in my health plan, but in climate tech. And it's a huge job opportunity. Think about we were just talking about public housing, right? There are thousands of public housing buildings around this city. It's 180,000 apartments, okay? Think about all that roof space. And we've got to replace basically every system in those buildings, plumbing, electrical, all of it. We could leapfrog to deeply sustainable gray water systems, solar on the roofs, the most energy efficient windows, all of that. That's all work that we could train New Yorkers, partnering with our unions, to really create a pathway to jobs. I'm also a big, Mike Fishman, who ran 32BJ, is a co-chair of my campaign. He started something called Climate Jobs that is very focused on wind power. Andrew Cuomo's been a leader on wind power. New York City should have the port where we are bringing the components for those giant turbines. They should land here in New York City. We should have the workers who are assembling. And by the way, there are a number of places in Sunset Park and there are a range of places where that could go. Training the workers not only to install them in Long Island Sound, but actually to maintain them. Those are a huge opportunity. There are many opportunities like that where on climate we could be a leader in the world and create jobs again. With the United Nations here, with New York's position as a leading global city, we should be leading again as we were. But we should also do one more thing, Stephen. We should put environmental justice at the center of this, right? We learned from Sandy, we've learned from COVID, those who are most vulnerable before crisis are always hurt the worst by it. And so we have to really focus our efforts on making our shorelines more secure, but also more beautiful with new parks and others. We need to focus on ensuring that public housing. I was in the Rockaways the other day. I saw a sign of Sandy renovations that are still going on. Think about that. We haven't even taken the money that I went to Congress and worked hard to get. We haven't even put that to work in the Rockaways, in public housing, and many other places, right? That's unacceptable. We have to actually get to work and focus on the most vulnerable communities because they're the most vulnerable to COVID. They're also the most vulnerable to climate change.
Shaun, thank you. I'm going to ask you one last question with a fast minute because it is 10:01. There's a lot of information people keep in their heads to vote, and it's hard to remember it all. So I'm going to say if there is one thing you want us all to remember about you when we step into that voting booth, what is it?
That every day of my life as a lifelong New Yorker, I have dedicated to building this city back from the challenges we have faced every single day. Nobody has worked harder at that, and nobody has made more progress, whether it's with Johnny Ray Youngblood and the East Brooklyn congregations, or whether it's sitting side by side with Dr. Fauci in the Situation Room. I have dedicated as a public servant for 30 years, every day of my life, to keeping New Yorkers safe and building opportunity for them. That's what New York needs at this moment of crisis in City Hall.
Shaun, thank you. One, thank you for being such a dedicated and longtime public servant. Thanks for being such a good partner to Abney. On behalf of myself and the great Melvin Miller, and our entire community. We're grateful for your time to talk to us about why you're running, and I'm sure we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Thank you, Melva. Big elbow.